everyone. I'm Wendell Jones, and welcome to the program Jones and Company. On this program, we examine national and international issues, and we are doing both today. Safeguarding the integrity of the financial services industry and thereby protecting the Bahamian economy is one of the most important challenges we face. And so it was a good thing for the Bahamas to host the first regional anti-money laundering terrorist financing conference this past week here in the Bahamas, right here in New Providence. And the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, we are told, is very active and doing some wonderful things in our region. And so today on our program, we have guests who are from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, and they are here along with the Minister of Legal Affairs and our own Attorney General, the Honorable Allyson Maynard Gibson. And Minister Gibson has brought along Calvin Wilson, who is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Action Task Force, and Mr. Shadrach Haruna, who is Legal Advisor of the Commonwealth Secretariat, headquartered in London. Welcome to the program, Minister, and Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
Mr. Haruna.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you here today.
Nice seeing you too.
Minister, you were very instrumental in organizing the regional conference, weren't you?
Yes, Mr. Jones. May I tell you a little bit about it?
Yes, please.
Thank you. When, as you know, in November last year, the Bahamas was given the honor of becoming the chair of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFATF, which is the regional arm of the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the governing body for anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism financing in the world. And at that November meeting, the president of the FATF, in the margins, asked me whether I would consider hosting what would be a first regional anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism financing meeting. And when we say regional, it's important to note that it includes not just the English-speaking members of the Caribbean, but also Spanish, French, and Dutch. And it also includes El Salvador in Central America, and also countries such as Guyana and Suriname on the northern coast of South America. So we're talking about, and Bermuda, we're talking about a very large region. Our Deputy Prime Minister was then Acting Prime Minister, who graced us with his presence. I asked him, would the government commit? He immediately agreed. And of course, you know that the Prime Minister, who is one also who believes in building a sound financial system, and the Bahamas being seen as a leader in financial services, ratified that agreement when he returned to the country. And so less than 6 months later, here we are having the privilege, it's an historic moment, to host the first annual regional meeting. And we are so delighted that the FATF president, who lives in Russia, did agree to come, and he was here. He spoke on 2 days. Of course, we're always happy to have Calvin Wilson, who is the face of the institution, because, you know, chairmen come and go. And we are extremely delighted also to have Shadrach Haruna here from the Commonwealth Secretariat, which helps not only the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, but the Commonwealth Secretariat is giving the Bahamas considerable assistance in our legal efficiency, or efficiency in administration of justice project. And it's important to state that they obviously go together. You can put your framework in, but people have to be seen. A part of the evaluation, especially in the 4th round, is to see that your framework is operational. And so the courts and the legal system are very, very important.
Let's tell our public, the Bahamian public, how important this organization is in our region. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words in your introduction. The organization is very important because it's the work it does is part and parcel with the international community in protecting the global financial system, and by extension, our regional financial system from being infiltrated by transnational criminal organizations. And it's important that we are seen to be doing our work effectively, because by doing our work effectively, our countries in the region, particularly those engaged in international financial services, will have a sound reputation globally. And reputation is important to the longevity of the international financial services sector, which is very important to the Bahamian economy. And so if we are seeking to do our job effectively, and we can tell the global community that our region is sound, then the ability of the countries in the region to conduct international financial services, generate revenue for the governments, so that the governments can take care of the day-to-day needs of their citizens would be assured.
And what is the role of the Commonwealth Secretariat in all of this? Are you just advising on modalities? What is it?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think it's relevant. Commonwealth Secretariat is the Secretariat for the Commonwealth countries. And we have Bahamas and then the Caribbean countries that are members of Commonwealth as part of our member states that we really want to see that they conform and comply with the standard requires of FATF. And of course, we also believe that rule of law and rule of law is required for effective administration in any given country. And where you allow crime to thrive, of course, that undermines democracy as well as good governance. And we are very concerned with good governance in this case. And money laundering is one of those crimes that actually affect good governance in any country. We want to see we have the mandate from heads of government of the Commonwealth to ensure that our member states are well endowed with the capacity required to fight money laundering. And that is why we have our support for the CFATF as well as member states, including the Bahamas. And then we are also here as part of our criminal justice reform to assist the Bahamian government to ensure that they have a platform, effective platform to administer justice and then for effective administration of justice as well. So that's part of what, and that's how we came in.
You have ill-gotten gains all over the world, Madam Attorney General and gentlemen. And it can be argued by some people that there are different standards for different jurisdictions of the world. Are we in the Caribbean Action Task Force adhering and subscribing to the same standards, say, for FATF?
I'd say yes, because the standards are universal. They are set by the FATF in conjunction with the FATF-style regional bodies, of which the CFATF is the first. And there are 8 bodies across the world, Africa, the Middle East, Eurasia, Europe, and South America. And we all play by the same rules. The FATF 49 recommendations were used for the 3rd round of mutual evaluations. The recommendations were revised in 2012. And so looking towards the 4th round, which began in 2014, or 2015, I'm sorry, it would be the FATF 40 recommendations. So it's the same rules for every country around the world.
And I assume that the Caribbean Task Force would be able to enforce sanctions against countries that run afoul of whatever rules that you have in place? Yes?
Well, that's correct. But we also applaud, good behavior and good achievements when we see them. And we have what we call centers of excellence, where the level of compliance with the recommendations is, it's high, and the culture of compliance in the jurisdiction is strong. But yes, like all countries and all organizations around the world, there are countries in our organization where the level of compliance is not satisfactory. And where we see that, we encourage them to make the necessary reform. If they're dilatory in doing so, then we have to take firm action, because we have to demonstrate to the international community that we are able to deal with the business in our region. And so we've had to take the hard decision in the case of Dominica, where we issued a statement in May last year, 2013, as well as Belize and Guyana, indicating that yes, you have difficulties, but we are encouraging you to move forward with your reform efforts. In the case of Dominica, the Prime Minister and the Attorney General took charge of the reform efforts, and the pace of reform was expedited. And so they fell out of the threat of being further action. In the case of Belize and Guyana, however, we had to step up the pressure in November last year because they were somewhat dilatory in moving forward in terms of rectifying their deficiencies. And so we issued a public statement which called upon the global community, countries in the region, to consider the risks emanating from those two jurisdictions and see whether they need to take countermeasures based upon the risk that they saw. In the case of Belize, the government responded positively and passed a suite of legislation. In the case of Guyana, however, the political situation in Guyana is somewhat difficult at the moment, and the legislation hasn't yet been passed. And so we are seeking to use whatever measures are necessary to get the divide to be bridged, and hopefully very soon, because we are optimistic, given the implications of being placed on a public statement, that the opposition and the government will find common ground and pass the legislation.
How clean is this jurisdiction, the Bahamas? How clean is it? Are we subscribing to these tenets of good behavior as far as the FATF is concerned, as well as the Caribbean Action Task Force? Yes, let our visitors respond.
I was going to defer to Madam Chair, but okay, and you've given me the task, and I'll respond. The average level of compliance after the third round of assessments, we've done 3 rounds, is 40%. That's not
40%?
40%.
In the Bahamas?
No, I said the average level of compliance.
Oh, I see, okay.
In the case of the Bahamas, however, it's higher. It's around 57, I think. And the Bahamas, we all know that between 2000 and 2006, the Bahamas was placed on a list, and steps were taken by the government given the implications, and the country was taken off the list. And since then, based upon the follow-up process in the CFATF, because countries have to report regularly to the CFATF plenary meeting as to the progress, the steps they are taking to improve their structures. Bahamas has been consistently improving their structures over the years. So I would put Bahamas as one of our centers of excellence, where they can be emulated. The systems here can be emulated by other countries in the region. But going beyond that, in fact, you have civil servants in the Bahamas who are sharing their experiences with countries around the region. And maybe, I don't know if I should name Madam Chair, but Stephen Thompson is is one of our sterling examples from the Compliance Commission, because he's been going to Barbados, Jamaica. He's been helping Guatemala, and I understand this week he's had discussions with Suriname to share the framework in the Compliance Commission as a mechanism that can be emulated by others around the region. In the case of your gaming board, they've helped, and I know this for a fact because I've done it. I assisted with the arrangements. They've assisted Suriname, Aruba, Curacao in terms of coming to this jurisdiction, engaging with the officials at the gaming board, and learning how they regulate the systems here. So you're doing quite a lot. And even, in terms of leadership of the Bahamas in the region, this is the second time that the Bahamas is at the head of the organization. Between 2002 and 2003, Alfred Sayers, the then Attorney General, was the chair of the organization, and he shepherded the country through the blacklisting process, as well as other officials. And now we have Madam Chair Maynard Gibson, the Attorney General, who is now leading the charge and doing lots of innovations for our organization.
Yes. But Madam Chair, as the gentleman calls you, Madam Attorney General, given the porous nature of the borders of the Bahamas, the archipelagic nature of the Bahamas, our proximity to the United States of America, it has to be very difficult for you to be in full compliance with anti-money laundering.
It's impossible, I would say, for any country, no matter whether it's the United States, China, Germany, the UK, or the Bahamas, or Trinidad or Barbados, to totally eliminate. What happens is that when the criteria are looked at, there's an evaluation as to whether or not we have the framework, the laws and the other framework, to actually minimize the risk that money laundering or terrorism financing is happening in our jurisdiction. And if it is found out, what then happens? And you heard me earlier mention that we're going into the 4th round of evaluations. And what that is, the whole world financial system, okay? So what happens there is that the legal and other framework is looked at, and then there's also a close evaluation, or there will be a close evaluation, as to whether or not there is effective implementation of the framework. And that means, do you actually have the actual resources, human and other resources, and how do you apply those resources? What's important about CFATF in implementing the 4th round of evaluations is that there has been a determination that if any of us stands alone, being small island nations, the likelihood that we will actually meet all the criteria. We set a goal of all of us, the entire region, all of our members, emerging at the end of the round, the 4th round, at least 75% compliant. Now, that doesn't just mean the evaluation itself, but the follow-up process, sort of the end of the round. If we stand alone, the likelihood of us succeeding is not high. If we come together as a region, we share resources, meaning capital, and also human resources, as Stephen has been traveling, and so we create a pool of experts. Or as it has been suggested, we create a trust fund to assist with mutual evaluations. The likelihood then changes quite dramatically. The likelihood of everybody really being successful changes dramatically. Can you just put a little gloss on what Captain said earlier about the 40% average and the Bahamas being significantly higher than that? That 40% average doesn't only pertain to our region, but other regions and other, what some people call first world countries also. There is not that high. You know, you'd think that maybe America would be at 100% or China would be at 100%. They're not. Okay?
Who makes this judgment on whether or not you are compliant? And I understand you to say that there is one international standard. But for the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, who makes the judgment?
Well, our peers, ourselves. Our countries have signed up to the FATF recommendations. We've signed a MOU amongst ourselves that we will do all in our power to combat drug trafficking, money laundering, and the financing of terrorism. And we send experts from amongst ourselves to monitor, to investigate what's happening on the ground in each jurisdiction, and prepare a report which is benchmarked against the FATF 40 recommendations. And we in the region, based upon our training, our understanding of the recommendations, we determine through the text of the report whether a country is in compliance or not. And then those reports are discussed in the plenary meetings, again, here among ourselves. And where, as I said before, where good things are happening, we applaud them. And when they aren't, we criticize and encourage.
You know, a significant amount of gambling takes place in the Caribbean. Most of the economies now are driven by tourism, and there are many casinos, and there are many web shops by locals in these jurisdictions, or in the jurisdiction of the Caribbean. And it is believed that it is very difficult to maneuver and to use casinos and web shops to get dirty money through or ill-gotten gains through. What mechanisms are in place in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, and other areas of the Caribbean to guard against this?
example of where casinos are properly regulated to guard against money laundering and casinos being utilized for funneling illegal proceeds through the system. And across the region, you have other regimes to deal with that. The example you mentioned, I'm not familiar with it.
Which example is this?
You said
web shops. Yes. Oh, you don't know what they are?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I'm sure that every jurisdiction where there's a risk, the local authorities will determine what the risks are, and they will implement the structures or enact the structures in terms of legislation and regulation to deal with the risk, and then operationally the law enforcement authorities will take the necessary action in accordance with the laws and regulations.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about that risk, Calvin. Maybe you can assist, and Shadrach as well. As we go into the fourth round of mutual evaluations, and we use this meeting today to talk about the intricacies of it. The country risk assessment is an extremely important exercise. And what happens is that each country looks at where their strengths and weaknesses lie and where are the risks within their country, respective territories for money laundering. And based upon that, now we know what do we have to address as a matter of extreme urgency for when our peers, it's a mutual evaluation process or a peer review process. So when your peers come in to look at you, they will be able to see whether or not you are aware of your own strengths and weaknesses and what are you doing to address it. I also want to talk about the peers, the reviewers, assessors that are used in this region. I want to say that they are actually as well called upon to attend and do assessments in other parts of the world, Australia, Fiji, Norway, etc. So, we are really talking about equals. People in Australia, the gaming board or the central bankers, the FIUs, looking at their colleagues in this region as their peers. They're not first grade and second grade. You're on the same level. And as Calvin has also said, when the report is completed, it is actually the full report, published on both the CFATF website and the FATF website. CFATF is now an associate member of FATF at the table, and so the conversation happens at that table, so you can't hide anything because people read these reports.
But if you're blacklisted, you have appeal, right?
No, I think let me look at it from this point of view. You mentioned the argument of standard. Mm-hmm. There's this perception that some countries actually judge other countries.
Yes.
I think the issue
and that just a caveat here, yeah, that countries in the Caribbean are held to a lower standard than countries in the developed world.
Well, I think it's a perception, just like Calvin has mentioned, and that is where we come in, because the perception is because you have a transnational crime. This is a crime that is not just localized. Whatever is happening here, money laundering, is happening in Australia, is happening in the UK, is happening in the US, and you require the same standard to curb these menace. And where in your own country, particularly developing jurisdictions, where we have problem with capacity, then of course you may not even be able to detect that you have such a crime there. Then even where you detect the crime, you may not have the capacity to go ahead and investigate it properly or prosecute it properly.
Yes.
Because of the complications and then the complexities of the case. So for that reason, the Commonwealth heads of government have asked the Secretariat to develop capacities among Commonwealth countries to see how they can easily detect the issue of money laundering in their jurisdiction. Also identify the risk, and the risk we're talking about is what are the predicate offenses that actually generate illicit funds. So if you're able to identify those predicate offenses as your risk, then of course you now have countermeasures to address such issues.
But risks vary from region to region.
Yes, I think the new CFATF revised recommendations have taken that into consideration as well, that you don't have to use the same standard depending on the risk you have in your jurisdictions. That is what you have to address. Calvin will speak to that as well. But the important thing is the capacity to identify this risk, the capacity to investigate, the capacity to prosecute, and the capacity to have international cooperation among nations to ensure that this case is actually investigated and properly prosecuted.
Well, let's take a break here.
And that's where we come in.
Let's take a break here because I'd like to pursue that and talk about the capacity or incapacity of countries in the Caribbean to police money laundering and terrorist activities. Let's take this break here. We'll come right back.